Okay. So we have Krystal here that we kind of talked about, Krystal Dunhee, and she works with this ministry called Agape Pamoja. And I'm going to let her kind of let you know what the ministry is all about. But I want you guys to ask some questions, get to know, what this ministry is. And she's going to even provide information on how you guys can help in some way. It's an awesome ministry. It's helping so many people, and the beauty of it is Crystal's giving a lot of opportunity for people of different cultures and diversity and all that to be able to learn more about what she's doing and what her ministry is all about, but to learn more about um, uh, just cultures around the world. So even from she does it from the one part of Africa, she'll explain, but just learning from what this person, these individuals' cultures are like and how they are adapting to life here it's an amazing story. So ask great questions. Um, and we have her for a little bit. So Krystal, I'll let you run with it and we'll kind of have that dialogue.
All right, great. Well, thank you so much, Doug. And everybody, just super thankful to be here. We're pretty informal here. So just if you want to, you can put a hand up if you have a question, anything like that. So little introduction. So my name is Krystal Dunahee. I work part-time at Abundant Life. As a matter of fact, this gray door back here leads to Doug's office from my office. And this gray door over here leads to Jeff Cox's office. I think you guys might know Jeff Cox from Calvary.
Yeah.
So, which is quite fun.
Yeah.
They're both great to work with, but I'm part-time here as an executive assistant, helping with some of the ministries. But my big heartbeat is working with African refugees who are living here in Kansas City. So my husband and I, we founded a nonprofit about 7 years ago. We live in Lee Summit, Missouri, which is very much a bubble. It's a white suburban middle upper class bubble. And, usually people don't recognize that we're living in a bubble until we step outside of that bubble, right? And so for many, many years, we were very comfortable, very unaware of other cultures and people groups that were just a short drive from Lee Summit. It was about 7 years ago. You might remember the Ferguson riots that happened. There was a lot of racial tensions that were happening specifically between the African American community and the Caucasian community. And it was a huge deal. And the church that we attend partnered with a number of other churches in Kansas City of different ethnicities. And we all met at the World War I Museum for an event called Hope Lives. Um, at that, I'd like to say I was a hero and I went to that, but guys, I was probably sleeping and I totally didn't go to that event, but my husband did. My husband, he's Caucasian. And he went to that event and really connected with the African American community while there. He's highly social, very relational, got to meet new people he had never met before. Um, and that ignited a fire that started in him where he started doing life a lot with the African community, African American community in Kansas City. Now, I'm going to break things down just for a second. And for some of you, this is going to be like, well, duh, I know this already. But if you are similar to where I was a few years ago living in a bubble, you may or may not realize this. So I'm going to break down a couple of terminologies just to make sure that we're all clear. You have African American communities and you have African. They're not exactly the same.
Yeah.
So Felicia is nodding her head up and down. Yes. So African American community, that's going to be people who typically have lived in the United States for several generations, predating slavery from back in their heritage, right? Originally from Africa, though, but they've lived here in the States for several generations typically. African community typically is used to describe somebody who is much more newly from Africa. They might live in Africa still, or they can be African and be in the States. Maybe they're from Kenya, Uganda, Congo, anything like that. So when you hear me refer to African American versus African, that's the difference. So our ministry works with the African refugee community, which are refugees who come from Central Africa, specifically originating from the Congo, which I'll share a little bit more about that in a moment. So refugees, I want to also kind of talk about a couple terms there, refugees versus immigrants. They have a lot of similarities in that they're coming from different countries. An immigrant typically is somebody who comes by choice. They get to choose that they're leaving their country. Now, it might be because conditions are poor there, but they're choosing, I'm going to go and leave my country and go to a different country. Versus a refugee, usually there is a lack of choice there. Usually it is a natural disaster or a war or something that has broken out. And so they lose that choice. They are fleeing often for their safety, often for their lives. And a refugee usually ends up in what's called a refugee camp in a neighboring country that is more safe than the one they came from, but may not necessarily be what you and I would call healthy or good. Okay, so that's just kind of breaking down a couple of those terms as we're talking. So let me share a little bit about Agape Pamoja. Agape is the Greek word for, I'm sure you all are very familiar with it, love. And that goes to describe God's love, right? That is sacrificial for us. Sorry, that is my phone going off if you're hearing noises on my computer.
I thought it was mine for a second.
Yes.
Like, what am I doing wrong?
So that is God's love for each one of us. And so I don't know about you. I have 3 teenage daughters. Actually, one of them has her birthday today and is turning 20. That's my oldest. The other 2 are in high school. And it is easy for me to show them love. If they need a new band uniform for band, that's kind of their jam. Sure, I'll pay the money and go for it. And if they need driving lessons, which a few of them are working through that right now, yeah. Between my husband and I, we're going to make sure that they're studying for their practice test for their permit, working on getting their license. We've got a vehicle for them to practice in. We're going to be able to teach them how to drive, all those things. Those are things that are easy to do with our own kids, right? Is to show them agape love because our kids are our family or our family members, a sister, an aunt, a mom, things like that. It is not natural to show agape love to a complete stranger, which makes what we're doing with this ministry very different, is that we are picking complete strangers in the community and showing them love. Pamoja, that's a Swahili word. So I don't know any other organization that mixes Greek with Swahili, but that's what we did. So Pamoja is Swahili for community or together. That's really key with what we're doing because the group that we're serving, they're highly community oriented. Highly. So I don't know who on this Zoom call is the most social. Raise your hand if you think that you're the most social, relational person who could strike up a conversation. We see a lot of this right now. Okay, maybe it's Cindy. Cindy's got her hand up. Okay, so Cindy might be highly relational here, but for the Congolese refugee community, on a scale of 0 to 100, if you were highly relational here, Cindy, on say between 80 and 100 in our terms, you might be maybe a 10 or 15 at best in African refugee social context, being relational. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment. But Pamoja is key because we come alongside, alongside a community. We don't just do things for them, but it's always with them. So a lot of things that we're doing that's serving the community in Kansas City, I would say 99.9% of it is right alongside others in there who are African refugees. They are serving the community alongside us. And so I'll share a little bit more about like practically what that looks like in a little bit. But that is, in a nutshell, what Agape Pamoja is. So our mission statement is to assist refugees living in Kansas City with housing, food, clothing, life skills, leadership development. We're most known for our blessing houses. Those are cost affordable homes. So we started off with our first blessing house back in 2017, and we now house 35 refugee families. And the rent, so here's the funny deal. You guys might laugh at this one. I get a lot of comments often, especially when I'm walking through Home Depot or Lowe's, that, oh my gosh, you look like Joanna Gaines. The funny deal, do you see it now a little bit? Just a little bit.
Yeah.
She's half Asian, so am I. Um, but the funny deal is, I was never a house flipper at all. And even to this day, 7 years later, like, no, that's not really, I'm not really a house flipper, but I do the whole hardware store stuff and help with different aspects of the housing. But it's 50% of the going rate. And Kansas City is known a lot for having slumlords. Um, it's the number of homes that I visit that are not Agape Pamoja blessing houses that refugee families live in is the conditions that they're in is really appalling.
Mm.
And I don't know if you've ever washed your hands in water that was so freezing cold that it burned your hands. But
Yeah.
that's what I'm talking about. In the dead of winter, a slumlord who refuses to fix a water heater, and that's how horrible the water is. So things like that. But so housing is a big deal of what we do. We have no paid staff, and so all of the funds go right back into the refugee community. It really is a labor of love. So that, in a nutshell, is what we do. Let me share a little bit about refugees and their situation and where they're coming from, because it's a really important part of the story of what we do. So refugees, so if you have a cell phone or a TV or a computer, which all of you do because you're using one right now,
Yeah.
the screens are made out of some natural resources, cobalt and coltan. And imagine how much money that goes globally, right? So the Congo, which is in Central Africa, is the most well-resourced country in the whole wide world, across the whole planet. And so about 25, almost 30 years ago, war broke out because it was realized cobalt and coltan, which are used to make all these screens, are there in the Congo. And so you've got families who are in the Congo and neighboring countries who decide to break out with war. So when I say break out with war, I'm not talking about planes that are bombing. What I'm talking about is gunmen coming through, or men with machetes coming through a village and just causing complete chaos. And so you have usually children who would be home, or perhaps a few at a school kind of like type setting. Men who might have a little bit of, they would be off doing something else, waiting for work, maybe under a tree to see if an opportunity would come up. Women often walking to a nearby lake with 5-gallon buckets to get water for the week. So everybody's spread out. And when war breaks out, a lot of trauma and chaos happens because everybody goes in different directions while they're fleeing for their lives. So literally, we've heard stories of one of the first refugees we met, Solomon, who shared a story about how he was running for his life alongside a good friend, and a lion came and ate his friend. I mean, just things that sound like so foreign to you and me was a reality that they were facing, as well as a lot of death and a lot of unknown of where family members ended up, even to this day. So different family members in different refugee camps without a way to communicate with each other. Some have been remaining in refugee camps 25, 30 years later. And some are in neighboring, not neighboring, but in other countries where their names were drawn by lotto to go to, like the United States or Australia. So a lot of interesting reunifications that might happen over time with family members that were presumed to be dead or completely lost. But in the refugee camps, Tanzania is a really popular one. There is a refugee camp called Nyarugusu that is in Tanzania, which is right next to the Congo. And a number of the refugees in Kansas City come from Tanzania. Um, the refugee camps there are very much third world country. And so we're talking about mud huts. Usually the huts would have 1, 2, maybe 3 bedrooms if you had a nice hut. Lack of electricity. As of today, there might be a few places that might have Wi-Fi, like at churches, that kind of helps draw people in to come and connect to the Wi-Fi or get their phones charged. Water is very dangerous. And so it's a really scary thing. My husband, actually, that's what he does for a living here. As an engineer with Burns and McDonald's, he works with clean water here in the States. And so it's interesting. I went to Africa right outside of the refugee camps last year and could literally see a motorcycle being washed in a lake that was at the same place that people were doing their laundry, which was the same place they were literally getting their drinking water from to carry home, which was the same place they were taking baths in. And so there's a lot of sickness and death that happens from lack of good cleaning water. Food scarcity is a big issue. A lot of the teenagers that I work with here in Kansas City, they remember the feelings of being hungry, of hungry bellies in Africa. They share a lot of stories that are high trauma of going out into neighboring farmlands and working the farms as part of being in the refugee camps, but experiencing fleeing for their lives and because of rape and having to watch a friend getting caught and having to endure that when they were the one who got away. Murder, seeing murder in the cornfields. I mean, it's just a lot of high, I keep saying high trauma, but I don't know if there's any other better way to describe it. Things that you'll never forget, things that you typically in their culture don't really share with other people. And so a lot of this is bottled up inside. And so there's a lot of death. We hear a lot from the teenagers. Many have lost siblings in the same bed that they were in. They would wake up in the morning and they were gone, just dead because of sickness. There's a lot of witchcraft, witches that are in Africa. And so it's not something we hear a lot about here in the United States, and it sounds really foreign to us, but it's very much a prevalent thing there, including in the camp. I think everybody that I know here in the United States that's a refugee knows of a few witches from the community in Africa. And they've blamed them for things like poisoning their sibling who died and other things like that. Like, yep, that was a witch who did that. And so I don't know how true some of those stories are as far as if they actually were the one to poison their sibling who ended up dying or not, if it was just something else in the water, I don't know, but it's a very prevalent thing there. So education is really way behind in the refugee camps. Anybody who gets an education, there's a chance that they're significantly behind by the time that they might come to the United States. So a lot of the students who move into Kansas City public schools, they get tested to see, you know, where they're at educationally. And of course, some of them might have a little bit of English when they move here. If not, they're going to learn really fast. One of the schools here in Kansas City public schools that test the students often are like, we were sent a 3-year-old to our kindergarten class. The teachers are just beyond themselves. You know, it's that first week of school. Usually we have a lot of humor, kind of chuckling about it with the teachers, like, oh my, okay, what are you going to do? But there's a lot of that with reality. We had a young man who got put in the wrong grade by 3 years. He got put in a higher grade by 3 years somehow. There was no testing for him. It was just assumed what age he was. And he is literally a 20-year-old now who is getting ready to graduate at Avila University. So there's a lot with education, a lot of graduated seniors who I know who their reading levels are at a 5th grade level, math at a probably 3rd grade level. And so education is definitely different. And that's not across the board for all students. There are some students who are high achievers. I've seen a valedictorian who was part of our organization, who gave the speech at East High School in Kansas City this past year. That's the big prevalent immigrant and refugee high school in KC. He was a valedictorian. His speech was nothing like what you and I would hear in Lee Summit School District, Blue Springs, Independence, Overland Park. It was nothing like it, but it's where he was at, and it was really excellent for the school. Parents, let's talk about some of the parents with the families. Their education, or if they had a profession that was in the refugee camp, it is meaningless when they move to the United States, because, degrees don't transfer over to the US. Your certificate doesn't transfer. So we've known people, men who were teachers, and very good at what they did in the refugee camps. But as soon as they move here to the United States, their fate is to work the rest of their lives in a factory in Kansas City. So as you can imagine what that would do to them, there is a high level of alcoholism with the men who we work with here in Kansas City. But I'll be honest with you, probably 90% of the families who are African refugees here in KC that we serve with, about say a solid 95% of them are single mama families. Unfortunately, polygamy is very prevalent in African culture. And so I'll have to share with you, one day I was at one of our blessing houses with the family and hanging out with them. And within a few days, I was at a different house and I saw the same dad. And I just can't begin to tell you my you're kidding me moment when that happened. And I was like, this is in two of our blessing houses. We have one dad sharing two different families. Like, is this okay? And just the things I had to kind of mentally and emotionally go through was, is this okay? Are we going to allow this to happen? What are we going to do? And in the end, it was we're not here to fix that right now. That's not for us. That's not what we're addressing. We are here primarily for the teenagers who are highly receptive to growth. A lot of the parents are very set in their ways. And we know that we can only, as an organization, fight so many battles. And that was just not one of them that we're going to fight. Now, there's a lot of other battles that we're fighting with some of the parents, including the importance of working, not just stopping work, especially when they move in a blessing house and they're saving lots of money. All of a sudden, people stop working. And so there's a lot of other battles that we're working to fight. But that was not one of them, but just kind of an insider scoop there. It was oh shock moment, oh crud moment. And it's one though that we help walk students through often, because they're trying to figure out what is the biblical worldview for a marriage? What does that look like? And so that does give us a great opportunity with the teenagers that we're serving with, without addressing the obvious. Yes. To say the obvious, though, what scripture says about God's design for marriage. So it's a beautiful thing. Yeah. And they're very receptive to that. So any questions so far? Okay, great. We'll keep going here. Feel free to throw your hand up if you do have a question. So let's talk about what it looks like to be living in the United States and what that transition looks like. The group, the community that we're serving alongside, and I keep referring to them as the refugee community, the group, but I'm going to be honest with you, a lot of them are like family. So when I was telling Doug before many of you joined the call here, I'm usually in Kansas City on Wednesdays. It's usually a full 12 to 14 hours just visiting refugee families and loving on them and spending time with them. And it's not just always me giving, but I'm oftentimes receiving so much of a blessing myself, because they have a lot of great things that we can learn from. But when I got back to my home in Lee Summit, sure enough, there was a refugee student, a young adult, crashed on my couch. He had made himself at home. He had just fractured his foot that day and was at the hospital. And so he was just kind of chillaxing there and think he wanted some food. And he wanted to borrow my crutches that he knew I had. And two other students that went to Abundant Life's Fusion Youth Ministry, they came and stopped by the house afterwards because the church is just 7 minutes from where we live. But anyways, it just keeps going and giving. They're like family. And so a lot of the students I'm talking about and the families I'm talking about, they really literally are like my sons and my daughters. They
Mm.
are my children's dearest friends. And they are who definitely a good sense of community for who we are, even though our skin tones are very different. And there's a lot of differences, but there's a lot of beauty in that. So
Absolutely.
yeah, it's a beautiful thing. So all that to say, let's talk a little bit about what it means to live in the United States and what that transition looks like. So I had mentioned before, I had asked who's highly social and relational, and Cindy had put her hand up, and which is awesome, very relational. You could probably strike up a conversation with any stranger and talk to them like a friend. Is that right, Cindy?
Pretty
Nice.
much.
Pretty much. All right. I love it. I love it. And so, yeah, if we were to take the scale of, let's say, 0 to 100 in American terms, Cindy in American culture would be up at the upper top there, 80 to 100, we said. But in African culture, relationally, she would be down here at the lower end of that. And the reason why is African refugees are highly relational, highly social. Let's talk about that a little bit. They're going to be physically very close in proximity. And so when some of the students are at my house, they are practically sitting on each other on the couch, laying on each other. And it's usually girls with girls. The guys are less so. I know I've heard stories of some of them holding hands, but I think that the teen boys learned really quickly that means something else in American culture, and they're very aware of that. And that's something that they don't want to be labeled at, because that's highly looked down on, especially in their culture. Is the whole LGBTQ movement is highly frowned upon in African refugee families. And so but they, often girls will put their heads on boys' shoulders or link an arm, things like that, just as friends. It's nothing more, which is really unique for us. My daughters even had to kind of get used to that, but now I see they snuggle up with their African girlfriends also, and they're hanging out and they're good buds, and which is really fun. But highly relational. Nobody knows how to throw a wedding party like an African. Felicia, you know it. I love it. I love it. And so
I go to a church, a Kenyan, my pastor's Kenyan, and probably 95% of our churches, either Kenya, Rwanda, and Ethiopian, and
Wow.
yeah, so I'm used to all of what you're saying.
This is
I
awesome.
love that. I love that. Are you also?
No, I am not.
Okay.
I'm African American,
Yeah.
but I have loved learning about their culture, being a part of them, and being embraced by them.
I love that. Great for you. I love it. Well, it's a beautiful thing to see. My daughter, who is a quarter Chinese and 3/4 Caucasian, says someday when she gets married, she's going to have an African wedding, whether or not the groom is African. So think about the wedding ceremony in American culture. We usually see a bride come down. The music is very solemn. It's the typical bridal chorus that gets played as she comes down the aisle. And her steps are usually like this, right? Like this. And so are the bridesmaids, right? And the groomsmen are all standing up front. And it's I don't want to say it's solemn because it's not that serious. It's lovely and everything, right? It's elegant. It's peaceful and elegant. In African culture, it's the complete opposite. You're going to see a lively music going on, and the bridesmaids and groomsmen are doing an awesome dance coming down the, the aisle. It's a celebration. It's a party, which when you think about, our marriage, you think about the symbolism, right? And we are the bride of Christ. That should be a celebration too, right? There's some beauty in that to be found. And it's fun, even during the reception, tons of dancing as well. The whole community comes out. There's no such thing as an RSVP for an African wedding. Now imagine that. So I'm going to go on a little tangent here for a second and share some fun stories with you.
There you go.
Yes. So think about COVID and think about how we had to have all of the restrictions about capacity, right? Think about if you are Congolese and living in Kansas City and there's no such thing as an RSVP, capacity kind of goes out the window because listen, you have no idea who's coming and how many are coming and at what time they're coming, because also the sense of time is definitely different than what it is in the United States, sometimes by several hours after the noted time. And so if a party starts at 4, there will be people showing up at 7, 8, 9, 10, things like that. And so at African weddings, they've learned to save the food for the very end of the party. So people don't just come and eat and then leave. They want it to be a true celebration. So you've got all these restrictions. I can't tell you how many African refugee weddings I went to where police were called because of capacity issues at the door, that the event center was struggling to help maintain. So the African refugee community came up with something really smart, though. They created their own security team. Now, they are not a security team who has weapons or guns or mace or anything like that. It's just a group of men who are there to patrol and help make sure that the intended guests are coming in, and others do have to wait just a little bit more if seating is an issue. And they help mediate that between the venue and the party, the guests. So it was a great solution they came up with. But anytime I go to an African wedding reception now, I'm always looking for who's on the security team. Oh, it's Joe from the community. Oh, there's so and so. I mean, it's just, different friends I get pulled in to do that, which is really fun. So they know how to celebrate. They also really know how to grieve. That's part of their relational. So you talk about the relational aspect up here. Here in American culture, our grieving, it can look so many different ways, but typically it's a phone call or a visit to somebody who's lost somebody dear to them. And we go to the visitation and we go to the funeral. And then we might do a phone call or a check-in on them afterwards. Kind of depends on how close we are with them, right? It's very different in the African refugee community. Life stops. The factory employers know when there's a death, life stops for their workers who are part of that tribe or that community. So it's not just the death of somebody in the States. Oftentimes it's the death of a brother or somebody in Africa. And for a full week, there's what's called a funeral. And it's not the kind of funeral you and I would think about, like with a casket and a funeral service, especially if it's for somebody who's overseas, but it is a week-long thing at somebody's house. You come there usually after 3 o'clock. Don't come early in the morning because the family's just not ready for you. But there's a men's and a women's sitting area. And guys, the first time I ever went to one, I'm always really sensitive to men being segregated from women and things like that. And I didn't quite realize that there were 2 different sitting rooms. And I went and sat in the men's sitting room thinking, oh, I'm just going to come and sit in here and join my husband. Oh, that was a big no-no. And my husband looked at me right away, Nathan did. And he's been to several of these. And he looked at me and goes, you can't be in here, Krystal. Go sit in the women's area. And so you don't know what you don't know. And so I quickly got up, and went and found the women and sat on they have a mat on a floor. It's a very large mat. Think of probably like 15 by 15 feet. And that's where they sit and where they eat and where they mourn and where they grieve, where they wail out. That's not happening all week long, but that if you catch them at the right time, there's a lot of crying out. The women will sleep there for several days. I'll go to other homes and say, where's your mama at? Oh, she's at a funeral at so-and-so's house. Okay, so she's gone for a few days. Gotcha. And so that single mama might be gone for several days, which means, the kids are fending for themselves. There's usually a high schooler kid who's there with them, at least to help them. So, but that's the relational. Now, one thing that Americans are good at are tasks. We're really good at getting things done. So I'm curious to ask who on here is really good with tasks. Like, if somebody's got to get something done, I'm going to go get her done. I know how to get from A to B to C to D. Who on here is really good at getting tasks done? I'm going to put my hand up. Okay, Nikki's got her hand up. Some of you are just shy. I think some of you guys are good at tasks. Dylan's just going to admit it. He's like, no, I'm actually not. Okay, that's all right, Dylan. At least you know it. So
Yes.
so tasks though, and so here's the funny deal. Tasks, I'm going to say Nikki and myself were probably way up here in the 80-100%. Dylan, even though you shook your head no, the fact that you're a student at Calvary, the fact that you made it here on the Zoom call, the fact that you made it back from break, you know, I'm going to still put you up at 70% at least, okay? At least for being task oriented. African culture, African refugee culture is going to be flipped. Tasks are going to be 5-10%. So very much not task oriented. When we have done a ton of growth over the last 7 years with the task area. Rewind 7 years ago, and this is also typical for the typical African refugee person who's living in Kansas City. Tasks are way down low. So what that means is if somebody has a doctor's appointment that starts at 10 a.m. at Samuel Rogers, which is the health clinic for those who are on Medicare, Medicaid in Kansas City, 10 a.m. appointment, it's going to be hard to figure out the transportation piece there because transportation is a huge issue. Most of the mamas that I work with, they don't drive. They're afraid, they're terrified of driving even after all the years of being here. So transportation issue, remembering the appointment, and then even if you remember it and you do have transportation, trying to line that up to get there on time without missing that, let's just say 15-minute late window deadline. And then on top of that, bringing the documents with you that you might need, like a green card or your insurance card. Okay. That's going to be hugely tricky. Most of the, even the students who are pretty highly acclimated, almost all of them have to go back a second or a third time to get it right, to actually have a successful appointment. Even after that after that successful appointment, even if it's as big as a surgery, if I ask them, what was your surgery about? There's no clue. No clue at all. I can't tell you time after time after time. Okay, so you were in the hospital for 3 days. I get you had a sore throat, but what was your surgery about? I don't know. And so there's no medical record documentation for them to communicate themselves besides what's in the record systems that I'm sure nurses and doctors all have access to. It's just they themselves have no clue, even though I'm sure it was explained to them with a translator in the hospital. It's really hard. And so I can't begin to tell you, people who've been in the hospital for so long, it's hard for us to know how to help them or come alongside them besides some of the care components of food afterwards, or helping out with some of, checking in on their kiddos while they're in the hospital or the rest of their family members. So
would you contribute that to like an educational thing? It's like here we're educated on medical and keep taking care and all of that. So would you?
Yeah, so some of it is, some of it honestly is an English thing, but I know that there's a translator as well. But even with the translation, they just don't know how to communicate that back in English. Or so some of it is going to be education, yes. The other is that's a task I kind of heard, but I also know I'm here and being taken care of. So
Trust.
Yeah. So especially if you're the parent who's in charge. Now, if you happen to be a high school or a young adult who is highly acclimated to the States, particularly through our organization, because honestly, we take them leaps and bounds. And I'll share a little bit more about how that works and why it is that our organization is able to take them leaps and bounds much further. That we do have some select young adults and students who they will get it and they will be able to communicate very well about what's going on. And so a great example is yesterday, Emmanuel. He's a young adult. He decides to wake up, I think it was at 6 or 7 in the morning, go and chop wood. Now, guys, he does not have a fireplace in his house. I know that because he lives in a blessing house, and I took down the fireplace before he moved in. So there would be no fire in his house. I literally helped disassemble all the stones from it. He's out there chopping wood to go get a workout, is what he wanted to do. He knows he should be wearing closed-toed shoes, and he knows that there's a safety issue. He was wearing just slides that you slide your feet in, and the axe somehow slipped and got his, not his big toe, but the next one next to it. So he's at the hospital. You know, their families are close, but the communication with their family members are not great. So I'm at a project with his brother, who's just 2 years younger than him. And he's like, hey, my brother Emmanuel's in the hospital, Krystal, and I'm trying to reach him. And I don't know what's going on, but my mom heard he's in the hospital from somebody, and we don't know why. And I'm like, really? I'm like, let me call him and see. Sure enough, he picks up and he explains, yeah, I was chopping wood just to get a workout. It slipped. I could see my bone through it, and they put on stitches. So that's okay. Great communication there. You know what happened. Like, you were able to explain, and you got to wait, that you understood you got to wait 2 weeks before you get the stitches out. All that to say, tasks are really challenging for most of the refugee community. So they're very flipped from Americans. So if you can think about, if you are an American trying to plan something with an African refugee, it's going to be highly challenging, especially for those who are less acclimated, because you're highly relational, you're highly task oriented. Meet me here this time, especially if I drive 30 minutes into Kansas City to meet you. And it's a gamble if they're going to be there or not, and follow the plan. So it's a big challenge. So over the 7 years, we've done tremendous work to work alongside them to really nurture that. And so what does that look like? It looks like calling ahead of time, reminding, a lot of reminders, the week leading up to it, the days leading up to it, the day of, an hour before. That sounds really excessive, but we just want to go to the ends of the earth to be successful. And if that's what it takes, that's what it takes. So, yeah.
So let me ask you this. How have you adjusted yourself and your family or in your ministry around, you know, because we have our culture here and you're on time, and, you know, so how have you adjusted yourself to this?
Yes. I think boundaries is a good key word. And adjusting our expectations. So knowing, I think, first of all, who is the specific person that we're working with? If they are, even if they lived here for 5-6 years, there's some that are very much, they only go to home and only go to school. That's all they're allowed by their parents to do. That is it. No other activities. And that sounds really cruel in a way, but the parents see that as a protective measure for them. So if we have a student like that, where we know they're going to be culture shocked by what we're doing, even being with our organization that has other African refugee students like them that they would see at school and in the community, there's a lot of shock for them. So we know to have some extra grace there, explain expectations a little bit more slowly and clearly, and in kind of like a story format, not just as a list of do this, do that. Sometimes the visual texts are extremely helpful. So, you know, if you're part of a youth group and say you're a youth pastor working with teens, there's no way you're going to be allowed to text with them and that be okay in American culture, right? Like, for the most part, that's absolutely not okay. That's crossing a line. Fortunately, we are not that. We are a different kind of organization. And that is an important part of our communication, is putting a visual text there for them to see as part of our relation. And we have different steps of accountability in place to make sure that nothing inappropriate is happening and things are not out of hand. It's a very transparent method that we're using. So, but yeah, setting our expectations. So if we have somebody who's been involved with us for a while, and they're very involved with us, we just know, like, no, you know, they know, like, when we're picking up for transportation, every week we send out transportation lists to Saturday projects. We do house renovations every single Saturday in Kansas City. It's a house for the refugee community. And I always send out a transportation list, and they know they have to be ready because I tell their driver, you're not waiting on them. They need to have their shoes on. They need to be ready to walk out the door. They can't be rolling out of bed. That's not how this works. And if you have to leave them behind, they get to sit at home for that day rather than joining. And they want to join because that's where their friends are at. That's where the free food is at. We provide meals to every single thing we do. We go so broke with food, guys.
Yeah.
Food is hungry teens. We're feeding the masses constantly. And so we're feeding probably close to 40 plus people per week. That's probably way on the low end, depending on the number of events that we're doing per week. And so,
Wow.
yeah, it's a lot. And so, but yeah, I think to answer your question, Doug, it all just depends on who's the person and how can we walk alongside graciously, but with boundaries. And, you know, we want to be protective of ourselves. We want to be protective of volunteers. We want to be protective of the community that we're serving. And we really want to help them. So.
Yeah. So you said it's something very important that we kind of addressed earlier in this class. It's getting to know that person on a personal level so that, you know how to communicate with them, is so important. And there is going to be barriers and all that stuff too, but learning how to overcome those barriers. And you guys have done such a good job at that. So
Yeah.
yeah,
Well,
go ahead.
It's fascinating for us as we communicate with them. But you know what's really interesting is watching some of the students and how they communicate with one another. So an issue that we recently had that we've been working through, and I think, Doug, I probably shared this with you in a meeting recently, was them feeling bullied and not having a voice by their peers. I don't remember if you were in that meeting or not, Doug.
Yeah.
You were, okay. Yeah. So communication is important, but that's something that we've come alongside them and helping them with. You do have a voice. You don't have to be in complete flight mode. Here is how, let's talk through some practical things that you can say to advocate for yourself to your peers, rather than feeling like you got to take it, right? So yeah, communication goes many, many, many ways.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So living in the United States, there's that whole learning how to be more task oriented when your natural go-to is relational. And so that's where I would say doing any work with somebody, I always have an equation I follow whenever I enter a refugee home and I'm with the parents and I have tasks on my mind. I'm here to get this permission slip signed. That is my end goal. If I walk into the house and give a brief hello and I'm in a hurry and it's a 10-minute visit to get that permission slip signed, that is never gonna float ever. I will walk away probably with an unsigned permission slip or a signed permission slip that will get changed to being unsigned later, a changed sign. So if I really want to be successful with that, or with professional counseling, if that were to happen, or anything like that, the equation is, hey, how are you doing, to the mom or dad, right? How are you doing? How is your family? How are your children? How's your job going? And asking questions. I mean, you just have to follow that whole equation of being relational, sitting with them, not standing, sharing in some of the food, even when you're not hungry.
Okay.
Yes. And even if you don't know, if you're unsure about the sanitation of the food, picking wisely the ones that you are more sure about, and just going and enjoying a little bit with them. And it might be a cutie orange that's sitting there that you can peel and eat, or a banana that you can peel and eat, or an apple you can wash and enjoy, things like that. But just spending time with them. So you guys have probably heard, it was a big fad several years ago, that game Among Us. You guys know that one? No. Okay. You do if you had children who were of that age, a video game age. So, or Dylan, you might be that age. So, yes. So Among Us, it was a fun game where it was a video game where you can go and you try to go around and figure out who like the secret killer is on the video game. But I use that phrase Among Us, not because we're killing anybody here with the organization, but you really do have to be among them relationally to be effective. And that goes for everything that you want to do, any task, any agenda, any goal, any conversation. Showing that care component is really essential. So living in the US, relational versus task, of course, learning English is a huge deal. We always break down the words. So we have volunteer teams, American volunteer teams that serve with us every Saturday, alongside Pamoja, together with the African refugee community. And I always find out what their professions are. I always go around the circle with the American volunteers and find out their professions, because I want to try to always connect them with a student who has a similar interest. So Mariana is a student who is a refugee. She just did a human resources internship with Kansas City Public Schools. I just met somebody this Saturday at the same project who works in human resources for a job, and I was able to say, go paint this wall together and talk, you know. And so, but I did tell the American volunteer before I connected her, I said, in your job description to me, just standing here in the 3 sentences you gave me, there were about 5 words I didn't like, I understood, but I know she will not understand. And you have to break those down to like a 4th grade, 5th grade speaking level, the vocabulary. It's just really hard. And so I forget what the words were, might have been like suspension or a big fancy word of how you're going to let somebody go. Right. And I was like, yep, you got to break those down. You got to say firing. And so things like that with English. You know, of course, education, I shared that a little bit ago about how many times they're often behind. We have a lot of 1st-generation college students who are making it into colleges here in the Kansas City area, who are Congolese refugees. They're actually breaking the glass ceiling for getting some scholarships that are worth $50,000 called Casey Scholars. And that's something our organization has walked alongside them to apply for and get.
That is so awesome.
It's huge, and it's life-changing for them, very life-changing for them. Systems are always a challenge for them. So that's why we walk alongside them with that application process. But we tell them, we are not writing your essays for you. No, because you will want the credit of knowing you had earned that scholarship, not because someone wrote an essay for you, but we'll help you proofread it. We'll give you some feedback. We'll help you with the systematic challenges of, what if I ask my teacher to do a reference and I can see the deadlines coming up and they still haven't done it? Do I just give up? Right. And so, no, here's how we're going to pursue that. Here's what you're going to say to your teacher. Here's who else you're going to approach, things like that. Yes. I see a question, Felicia.
Given the history of the United States and slavery and so on and so forth, being that these people that are coming that are refugees and they're coming to the United States, how have you addressed, like, because they're of African descent, how have you addressed racism with them, or have any of them experienced that and come to you all about that, and how do they navigate that?
Yes, that's a great question. So yes, they have experienced racism, specifically in their schools. I will say this, things that, for example, Juneteenth, that is a holiday that is very important for our country, no matter what your race is, but it's especially important for African Americans because of slavery and the history, right? Not a single refugee student I talked with knew what that holiday was about. And so I spent some time sharing with them why there's a party at the Hope Center today, in Kansas City. And here's what that's about, Juneteenth, things like that. But they do, so the African-American culture piece is very foreign to them. And a lot of it's because they're kind of newer here, and it's not their story necessarily, or their parents' story. It's not something their parents or grandparents ever passed down to them. It's just not part of their heritage, specifically them. But I would say racism, definitely. So in their schools, we hear a lot of stories. There's definitely a segregation with tribes and cultures. The students in our organization come from different African tribes, and oftentimes they won't mix until they're in our organization. They might know that person sits in their classroom, but until they're in our organization together, and we're taking them off to Colorado together, for a big group trip, and they're getting to know them and having fun and climbing mountains together, or whatever it is that they're doing, and Bible studies together, things like that. Until that happens, they're in a separate tribe kind of than what I am. And they know it. They know what tribes they're all in. There's definitely tensions between Africans and African Americans, and they clearly share about that. So I don't know how necessarily African Americans feel about Africans. I've only experienced really great, nice things from the Hope Center, who are African Americans, towards African refugees. But I know at school with their peers, their teens, there is a sense of fear, a sense of violence, a sense of other things that might be perceived as negative for them or their families. I know that the African refugees, there's a hygiene issue with body odors and things like that. And that is something that we work alongside teens to discuss and help them with, as far as how often they're washing their clothes, using deodorant, taking showers, things like that. So, we have got a youth camp coming up this week, and I've already told them, I'm just letting you know deodorant is on your packing list, because we took them all out shopping, the boys last week and the girls last week. Deodorant is on your list, and that is a gift from our organization to you. You don't have to buy that at the store. You have to use the gift. I don't care if you think that you don't have to use the gift. You have to use the gift every single day. But it's hard when you're sitting in a classroom with peers and you smell and you don't realize it. Your accent is, a lot different. Clearly, you're not African American, and you're not, someone who was born in the States. So there's definitely a big segregation. Now, sure, they'll be friendly with somebody who strikes up a conversation with them, but that's not going to be their go-to friends. But so when I hear racism, yeah, there's definitely a like this. And it's not to say that it's one-sided. It often happens when we don't understand another culture and where they're coming from. So it could definitely be very two-sided, and probably is, in understanding other cultures and where they're coming from, So yeah, I think I don't think I've ever experienced that with any of the teachers from their school. I know a lot of their teachers and coaches, so I haven't experienced any racism from that avenue. But you can definitely see, I think, even during like a middle school graduation, it'll really come out. Certain teachers have certain draws to certain people groups.
Yeah, I was gonna say, since going to this church that I've been part of for going 3 years, what I've learned is that Africans, or especially the Kenyan culture, um, they have certain, uh, I'll say probably Africans in general, but I'll say specifically the Kenyan culture because that's the one that I've been interacting most with. They have uh, stereotypes about African Americans, um, based on what they've seen in media, and I would say vice versa, African Americans to Africans, because we're shown that they stay in villages and they're all poor and they all have the flies and the babies with the big bellies and all of that stuff. And the truth of the matter is that's not every culture. That's not even every, you might find some of those people in some of the smaller villages, but in the cities, they live just like we do. And what I found really hilarious, some of our young people from our church went out to California for a soccer event. And when they went out to, is it Bel Air that has the big homes?
Oh yeah, yeah.
And they went to take a tour, and they took the tour and they said they started laughing because they were like, why are you taking the tour for homes that we have home look like in Africa? And I thought that was so crazy because
Yeah.
based on media, we assume that they don't have anything. And so I just find that a lot of times we get fed a lot of things about each other and we make assumptions about each other. And until you actually ask the questions and get to know them, you don't really know.
That's so true. That's a great point, which is why it's all the more key to be among them to truly understand and you said it correctly, asking questions, seeking understanding. Yeah, it's easy to want to approach things like a bull in a china shop. It sure is easy to make assumptions and be judgmental, isn't it? But if we really want to make some progress, we do have to be asking questions and being curious. Absolutely. It's really important. I know that we've got just a little bit of time left here, but I think something key to share is it's really important finding what another culture values, no matter what culture it is that you're working with. And yeah, I'll share here at the end ways to get involved with our organization. But honestly, my heartbeat is that you all get involved with an organization that you're curious about. It doesn't have to be ours. But finding what the culture values, and then coming alongside them, joining them for that. So African refugee culture, what do they value? Music and community. So at our Saturday Serve projects, there's always a speaker going with loud African music. It is not K-Love is playing on there. And it is not quiet, guys. It is what you would find if you were in one of their homes. It is loud, and you have to talk loud in order to have your voice heard. Oftentimes, I'll sometimes be a little sensitive to our Americans, and I'll say, okay, hey guys, we're going to turn this down just a couple of volume buttons down just so we can hear each other just a little bit, because I can tell the Americans are like, oh my word, that's loud. And it is loud. It is loud. Music is important though. Often in our serve projects, I tell the Americans when we're circled up at the beginning, just so you know, when you're painting this wall, at some point you're going to look and the paintbrush of the student you were painting alongside is down, and you're like, where did they even go? They've been gone for like 10 or 15 minutes. Are they using the bathroom or what? No, they're outside by the speaker having fun with friends or adults who are Americans that they've connected with over several years, and they're just having a great time out there being relational. So music, relational, music, relational, music, relational. If you got no music in the room you're serving in, they're going to walk away. If you're not having a conversation with them, they're going to walk away because you are boring and you don't value what they value. So finding whatever it is that people group values. And, that's a great thing. We also flip that with the students we work with as well. And we challenge them to find what Americans value. There are certain scenarios you have to do that as you're integrating into American culture. You have to figure out what's important. So what does that look like for tasks? What does that look like for our communication with one another? Things like that. So it goes both ways. But if we truly are serving a community, we have to be the first ones to be willing to give in that area. I think something that was a big shock for me was apparel, what to wear. It's different with some of the teens, but as soon as I am stepping foot into a house, it's highly disrespectful if I'm wearing shorts, athletic shorts that are plenty long. Athletic shorts, highly disrespectful. That would be the equivalence of a woman coming into the house, my house, wearing a barely clad bikini top and thong, having a conversation with my husband. I would be a little bit upset. That would be a little disrespectful. My children would probably be focused the entire time on what she's wearing rather than any words. I don't care how smart she is or how valuable she is, or if she's offering $1 million, right? None of it matters if there's something sidetracking. So I learned really quick, bring a piece of fabric and wrap it around me. If I'm wearing athletic shorts that day as soon as I hop out of our vehicle, I'm throwing that on, because I want my time to be, or my experience to be valuable and not sidetracked. So things like that, small things like that can be huge barriers in relationships. So I think even as you're serving with different cultures, knowing, is it okay to show the bottom of my feet with this culture that's Middle Eastern? Or is it okay to shake with my left hand?
Yeah.
In a lot of cultures, it's not, because that's the hand you use in the restroom to wipe yourself. I mean, and you do not shake somebody's hand with your left. So, just learning some of those what sounds like funny things. So, if you're ever meeting with somebody, I would do a Google search if you know nothing about some of the cultural pieces, just to kind of have an awareness of it before you walk in there. It'd be helpful. So
That's good.
Yeah. Great. Any questions? I know I do want to give you guys time to wrap up or ask anything.
Yes, we have about 10 minutes. She has a hard stop for sure. Any questions or observations or anything that you've encountered that could help the rest of the class or learn more about what she's doing?
I have one. Um, so with your organization, you said you started 7 years ago. Um, how do you guys funds with this housing, and where do you get the financial? I'm just so curious about this.
Yeah, that's a great question. Most organizations do a lot of grant writing and fundraising. Honestly, we started so grassroots where it was just my husband and myself. And so in the beginning, we funded it on our own. House number one, house number two, we funded on our own. We just wanted to do something to make a difference in Kansas City. And then we were like, okay, we're done. We're done. But then we had a friend who came and said, if you do a house number three, we'll go in half with you. So we did house number three and split that. And then we said we're officially done. And while we're doing a Saturday house renovation project, a vehicle pulls up. I recognize the woman in the vehicle from church. And we're just talking and she's just stopping by to encourage. But at the end of that conversation, she gave me an envelope and she goes, hey, I just wanted to give a little something to help with house number 4. And I'm thinking in my mind, I don't know if there's going to be a house number 4, but I'll accept this and we'll see how it can help the refugee community. I walk into the house and I open up the envelope in the kitchen. I'll never forget it. I'm standing there with my husband. It's just the two of us. I open it up. I'm expecting maybe 20 bucks, $100, $70,000 check for house number 4. They were firm believers, praise the Lord, of what we were doing. And since then, we've had donors who have come along the way. Wonderful people who just want to give, they want to contribute in some way. We've had one church sponsor house number 10, that was Abundant Life. We do little fundraisers for trips or camp experiences for students, but beyond that, it is all donor funded. We've got 2 grants we're applying for right now. So, but besides that, yeah, we're just by the graciousness of God's people is how we are moving forward.
Thank
And
you.
that's amazing. It's 24 properties that have 35 families. And so that just goes to show that's not us. I was a music major, a music ed major. There's no money there. So, and I work part-time at a church, and my husband, he works full-time as an engineer, but it's not gobs of money. So we're really thankful for, honestly, it's the story of the fish and the loaves of bread.
That's awesome. God provide, definitely.
Yeah. Yep, for sure.
How many volunteers do you have on a consistent basis, generally?
Yeah, Doug, I'll be honest with you, I'm terrible at keeping track. I barely even keep track of how many houses it is that we have. People often my team has to remind me of it often. Volunteers, honestly, we have some that are good staple ones that we see almost weekly. We have other ones that are doing things behind the scenes. We have numerous church groups that come through. So every week I see probably a brand new 5 faces or so that may or may not stick. Most do not, and that's okay. Never asking for them to come and stick. We're asking, come and try, come and experience. It's a beautiful thing going on. And you might have something in a conversation in the one time you serve that would be a huge blessing to a student. That might be something they might need to hear, a little hope, encouragement, something about life. And so, yeah, we've got some that stick and many who don't, and that is okay. That's honestly very typical of a lot of nonprofit organizations. That's the nonprofit world.
So from some of your volunteers, what's like some of the most common things that you hear back from them saying, I didn't realize this?
Yes. So the biggest thing is I didn't realize what a huge need that this was in Kansas City with refugees. I didn't realize how nice refugee Congolese students are. And they're a lot different than the American teens. And we hear that one over and over and over and over. They are extremely polite. They are extremely thankful. They are very thoughtful. They're amazing to work with. Now, they're very challenging to work with also. We know that from a lot of the staff with KCPS, they affirm what we know as well. Congolese refugees is the most difficult community to work with out of all the students because of the task relational. But they
Wow.
sure are nice and thoughtful. So once you can help break some of those barriers with the tasks, then you can move forward. But that's what our organization specializes in, is how to move forward through some of those hard barriers. But yeah, those are the things we hear from volunteers. And our volunteers that are completely sold out with the ministry that we're doing, they're loving it because they know they're helping out with something that is definitely a huge need, and they're seeing the progress. They're seeing students, I'll call her Z, who joined our organization, her sophomore, junior year of high school, complete distraction to the other girls. I looked at my husband and I said, I don't think this is going to work for her to be part of us. He said, no, stick with her, stick with her, stick with her. We got to really invest in her. She's amazing. She's my daughter's, one of her dearest best friends. She went from knowing no math to being the math champion of her math team, never picking up a tennis racket, to being the captain, and becoming the KC East prom queen her senior year. That was just less than 3 years ago, and is now a student at UMKC and volunteers her time with Kansas City Public Schools to help refugee grade school kids as they first are starting school. So huge success stories. She's just one of many. Yeah, Felicia.
Of all, since there's a difference again of culture, being American and all of that, what was the most disturbing difference to you that you had to kind of overcome and get used to, or to be able to deal with in a way that is sensitive and empathetic to them?
Yeah, there's a few of them. I would say, we talk about the tasks, and it's embarrassing to admit how much of a barrier that was, but that is for a lot of our American volunteers. It's easy to feel so disrespected when a student doesn't show up and meet you. That's so easy to feel so disrespected when they don't follow the plan. So that would be one. The other one that we carefully navigate is domestic violence. So we're mandated reporters, period. If something happens, we have to report, period. And we do. But we're really cautious about some of the stories we hear, I'll be honest with you, because we know it happens in every single home while they were in Africa. And we've caught glimpses of, not glimpses ourselves visually, but like stories that we hear about, like, my so-and-so hit me with a phone cord. Obviously that's, you can't do that. You can't do that. And so that's, conversations that we end up, honestly, my husband ends up having with the parents about, hey, you are in the United States. I don't know if you're aware of this or not, but here are the boundaries. But I'm just, there's been times I've had to drive students to the hospital myself over domestic stuff. Numerous times we've had to call the police on behalf of a student, or tell them get over to the neighbor's house right now. Things like that. And that's horrifying. It's humiliating for the students. They're embarrassed. They know it's against the law. They're really cautious about what they share with our organization, knowing that we are mandated reporters, because we let them know. Yes, because they build so much trust with us. I know it would destroy the trust if they didn't know ahead of time that we're mandated reporters, that they would tell us everything and we'd have to report. So we let them know at the forefront. And as a matter of fact, we have Camp Week coming up. It's a vulnerable time for our students. A lot of them want to share about things from their past, but before they step foot onto camp, when we meet the night before, I know I'm going to have a conversation with the whole group over certain rules they need to follow while at camp. But one of them is going to be just a friendly reminder. If there's anything going on in your home, you are welcome to share it. We want to know, we want to make sure you're safe, but it's something that we will have to report. And here's what that means. So that's hard, because that goes with the trust issue that we're working so hard to build up. But in the end, when we've had to do that in the past, literally I've had to drive a young lady who was beat while she was in a bath towel by her older brother And she found herself in a park by herself. I picked her up and took her straight to the hospital. And it was a scary situation for her. And there was a point where she didn't want to go. And I said, I'm just letting you know, we don't have a choice right now, you know? And so that's a hard thing. It's a hard thing.
Absolutely. All right. Well, Krystal, I know it's 10:45 and I want to be respectful of your time, and I know you have to go over to training. So
Yeah, I'd rather be here, guys. This is a training on a system. This was way more fun.
yeah, so I so appreciate everything that you do for those individuals and for Agape Pamoja and Kansas City in general. Man, it's such a awesome ministry. So and in your time, I totally appreciate your time today.
Well, thank you. Appreciate all of you. Thanks for the great interaction. I'll just throw out our website if anybody is interested in volunteering, or if you want more information and what we're doing or serving, or if you don't have time, we always accept resources, things like some gently used furniture items, as well as funds to help students go to camp or have experiences, things like that. But the website is agapepamoja.com. So it's AGAPE dot, or sorry, no dot, Agape Pamoja. So the next letter is PA, M as in mom, OJA.com. And that will lead you to our serve page, donate page. You can explore our story a little bit. We also have a Facebook page, but we only post about maybe 5% of what we do, because we don't ever want the community we're serving to feel like we're there just as a paparazzi to do poverty porn. So we want them to feel like we're actually doing community and life together. So, but you're welcome to check that out too, and reach out to us anyway. And you guys have been a joy. So best wishes to you, and hopefully I'll get to meet some of you guys someday.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
You bet. All right. Thank
Appreciate
you.
it. All right.
Thank you.
Take care.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you. All right. Well, let's continue the discussion a little bit. We got about 10 minutes. So what are some of your thoughts about what you heard? Or maybe even thoughts, but also what has changed in your mind from what you've heard? Jolene?
I mean, I thought about it in the context of the discussion board question, with St. Paul in 1 Corinthians 9, like, what extent do we go with culture for the sake of sharing Christ with them? So it's like, I thought you did a very good job explaining, okay, I obviously can't condone like certain parts of culture. Like if someone says, oh, this thing that's like polygamy, that's normal for a lot of cultures. Well, obviously I can't condone that, while also being like, okay, something like having a different standard for what's relational, or the music being a little louder. It's like, yeah, that's okay for the sake of sharing Christ with His love with people. I can deal with that. I don't want to say conform, because then it's like that would imply I'm pretending to like to be a part of it, but more so like I can just like, I'm not going to pick a fight over it. You guys feel like she did a really good job with that?
Yes, absolutely. I thought that was pretty good too. It's like, hey, when she has volunteers come in, this is what we're preparing you. This is what it looks like, and this is for them, right? And so for you to understand, so we're helping out. It's these. How can one thing that I would love to have talked to her about, and we didn't have enough time, is like, what does she see as something that they need counseling for, right? And we've had a lot of individuals from there, not a lot. We've had a few individuals from there receive counseling. So, I mean, I kind of understand a little bit of the situations, but I would like to have heard more from her on that aspect, and maybe we can get her back on, or I can ask that question. But thanks, Dylan. That was great. So, Jolene, you were going to say something?
I was going to say, I like when she said serving means willing to meet the community first and not thinking of yourself. Like you're there for them and you're not there for you, and also the limitations of what they can do as they serve, and understanding that you have limited resources no matter what it is, and understanding the value of it too. So
That's so good. Yeah. And all the work, I mean, all the work that kind of goes into what they're doing. And I think it all stems from learning them, learning the culture, learning the person, learning the individuals. All of these things even starts before the ministry goes, right? So how, learning how can we provide for them, but getting to know them. But here's the other thing, then they take interest. And she said there were what, 35 families, 24 homes, and they're all helping each other. So they all come together. It's just not like you build this home and then they're set and you don't ever hear from them again. It's they're included in this, and it's a purpose, and it's something that they can grab a hold onto and feel included. And so it's like this little community of their home. But then you have these volunteers that come in with different cultures and all that too. So everybody learns more about each other. I like that aspect of it too. What are some other thoughts? Observations? Felicia.
No, I was thinking as I was listening, because like I said, I don't think I have to compare to is what I'm experiencing being in um, mainly Kenyan church.
Yeah.
And I saw some similarities between the Kenyans and the Congolese in that they're very community oriented.
Mhm.
One of the things they taught me, um, I've learned since I've been in this church, is they don't see their family as just their immediate blood family. They see their tribe or their community as family. And so I think it was very wise of Krystal and her husband to integrate themselves into their culture, into their quote unquote tribe or culture, because that is the only way that they will really accept you and get to know you, because they believe in that connection between people. And so I just really appreciated that. It really made me think, how similar in some ways different, as I'm learning, to embrace being a part of a Kenyan church. And so, but I think that's the thing. I think it probably works not even just for African communities, but for most communities. If you engross yourself or be a part of or get to connect with the people that you're dealing with, you get to know them, um and and like you say, find those commonalities. So I
Yeah.
really appreciated that.
I think one of the biggest things from kind of what you were saying too is um, they're coming from a totally different country, culture, all of that stuff too, coming here. So what Krystal and her group has found out is let's get to know them, understand their culture, all that stuff too. And how do we integrate them in too? Because it was like going, okay, you're over here, there, time is not as valued, right? But here in America it is. So it's kind of give and take. What's the important things that you have to learn here is in the culture? Um, what kind of things can you hold on to? And that's what we're helping you do, is hold on to. Is like when you're helping with these houses, the music's loud, it's relational. So we want to help you hold on to all of this stuff too. But these are the important things that you have to learn here to be successful, you know?
I think it's really good, because I was thinking when she was saying that, so my pastor, he is very time conscious. So we start church when it says to start, we're started.
Right.
But I have gone to another Kenyan church where we were the guest minister, and my husband and I and my mother-in-law were the first ones there. And this church was supposed to start at like 10 or 10:30. I don't think they got there till like 11:15. So when we were sitting there like, wait a minute, is nobody here to even let us in the church? So,
Yeah.
I mean, again, that goes back to that, this is how they're not a time conscious, they're event driven
Yeah.
culture. So
That's
We
good.
just had to sit and wait until they started, and and like my pastor said, over in Kenya, they might preach for 2 hours. So, because it's not the time, it is the
Yeah.
event.
That is so right. I remember going from one church, I played drums at one church, went to another church, and they would start 10, 15 minutes late, or whatever. But then it would go on. I mean, if it started at 10, it wouldn't end till 1 sometimes. I mean, if they got into the praise or whatever, they just kept going. And I think it was, they were feeling the Spirit of God move. And so they wanted to relish that and be in that. And so they weren't time sensitive to that. And I really love that aspect of it too. But it's getting to know that and understand that. So as counselors too, we got to understand all those situations and how can we love them best. Um, that's so good.
And to understand we're minorities. We're minorities in the world as far as being time conscious.
Oh,
Most
absolutely.
cultures are not.
Um,
So
yeah.
So if you don't have don't get, like she was saying, she kind of felt some type of way about them not being on time. Well, that's the majority of the world.
Yeah.
We're just here in the United States. It's like, okay, 10 o'clock, we're supposed to be there at 10 o'clock. Okay, we're going to be there, 9:45. No, that's not everybody else's experience. So
Filipino culture would be like, you start the party at 6, people arrives at 7 or 8. So when I host a party, I tell them 4, but it really starts at 5 or 6.
That's right. So you understand that. So you say you're going to start at this
Yeah,
time, but yeah, that's
yeah.
good. With knowing that it's going to be an hour later, that's good. All right. Who else has a thought?
I just kept thinking how great my husband would fit into the African culture
So,
with the just he's super relational. He's super just loves people, can talk to a stranger, and also late everywhere. So
okay. Well, a good thing you ought to go out to that website and see how, and this might be one thing that you can serve with your husband just on that day that for the class. I mean, they meet quite a bit, and it'd be something good to observe while you heard what she was saying, and then kind of put it into practice and for a day or even more, even longer. That's good that he would fit right in. So good. Anybody else? Okay, let me stop this recording here.